Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me. Every time I'm around you, I think the energetic resonance always feels so high, and it's such an amazing, almost immediate invitation into a sacred space. And I can say that before that, my mind is usually, in some kind of work-related issue or some kind of banality of the world. And then I see you, and my energy becomes reoriented almost immediately. Can
Hmm.
you help me and anyone who's listening to us understand why I might be having that experience?
Hmm. Yeah, first of all, I feel that between us there's a strong resonance. That's why I think we also developed our friendship. And I think that, I spent a lot of time, I had 35 years of meditation and then 4 years of intensive meditation. I think that in that, like through that intense practice, there is some kind of change or opening happening inside. And I experienced that throughout, especially throughout these 4 years of intense meditation. And I think that also has naturally an effect without doing anything. It's like it's just happening by itself. And since you're very sensitive, I think you're picking up on that.
Well, yeah, no, I think it is in part my sensitivity, but I also remember the first time meeting you, where I just randomly was sitting next to you, and I felt all this energy and heat coming from your body. And I was like, "Who is this person? Like, what, what is going on?" Because it didn't seem like you had just come back from a run or something, but it seems sometimes that when this spiritual energy, for want of a better word, is concentrated, that there are translations into the physical.
Mhm.
And one of the things I appreciate about you is that you have a deep appreciation for alignment of the mind, the body, and the spirit.
Mhm.
Could you say a little bit about why you think at a time of overwhelm, this alignment is so important?
Yeah, because I think the only reason we talk about it is because we are often used to these three being out of alignment. And I think a main reason for this is trauma disorganizes the data flow or it fragments certain experiences inside. So if you're used to that fragmentation, we saw it in our parents, in our teachers, we see it in politicians and in society. So then alignment is so important because that's our, first of all, I think a natural state for our nervous system. That's a healthy state, and that means things flow. And we all know when we say something's flowing, it's like it feels easy, it feels effortless. And that's why in the healing work, we're always looking, okay, the alignment is actually the place where I feel more centered. Even if in the world there's a lot of volatility or noise, I stay centered. And from there, I can make decisions or choose or move in a way that is wise and not just overwhelmed by the noise. And I thought that practice of centering, I think, is tremendously important, especially in times like now. I mean, always, but now we really need it.
In the course that you're going to have, you're going to be focusing on this mind, body, spirit alignment. Could you say a little bit about why you think this is so important at a time like this globally,
Mhm.
and why personal well-being also bodes well for collective well-being?
Yeah, I anyway think that in the West, our thinking got too much oriented towards separate individuals. Like individuals and separation became equalized somehow. And that there is no, I mean, we cannot exist, we cannot have this talk without the oxygen that we are breathing and without the resonance between us. We wouldn't come together here to have this conversation or with all our meetings before. So this meeting is inherently part of a context. The child is inherently part of the family system that he grows up in. So the individual and the collective cannot be separated. It's an artificial separation that I believe is based on a lot of trauma, but that's not real. The reality is that we are all always interconnected, but we feel often very separate. And that's why also in the course we are focusing on how can I realign myself and see what can I train to be more aligned and what do I need to heal to be more aligned. And then together training and integration can induce development. And I think in this time we need a lot of development because we see crisis is an invitation for, it's a delayed, it's like the letter for, hey, you should develop came too late. That's why we have a crisis.
Well, when you were saying that about this mind body integration, I when I think about that myself, both for myself personally and also in the work that I do, I think whenever we're moving towards a state of collective intelligence or non-duality, there is both an excitement about losing this egoistic sense of the world, but there is also sometimes for certain people, a disturbing arousal that feels sexual and distracting because you are losing a sense of your own boundary and you're feeling a merger. How do you help people deal with the confusion around that sexual energy, or is it a confusion? And how do they then resolve that to be more relaxed into the arousal of the collective?
Yeah, I think we need to look at like what does it mean merging and what does it mean transcending? Like if I'm merging into something, then younger aspects of me are merging into another energy field. This can be a parent, of course, as a child. We are very kind of connected to our parents. So as we individuate, we become more ourself, but not separate, but we feel more our individuation. And then as we grow up and we transcend that individuated self, so we feel more non-dual. We feel less not separate with the world. And so what I would say, if there is if emerging energy, then it's something to look at to it that's a part of our integration work, so that because that arousal or also my sexual drive held in a mature self is beautiful. It's creative, it's alive, it's vibrant. But when it merges, so then it becomes distracting. It feels like it's always pulling me somewhere, and I seem like I have no control over it, which is not controlling by shutting it down, which means integrated in a mature perspective. Then it's not a disturbance, then it's part of me that I can enjoy, but it's not constantly distracting me. I would say that in in a short nutshell.
In your course, will you be guiding people through understanding how to deal with that energy so that they can relax into the arousal and experience the transcendence rather than the distraction of the merger that pulls them?
Yeah, in all ways, like also through fear or other emotional states that we can feel very stuck, especially in a situation like this when the world's a bit more volatile or noisy. Um, all the parts that are not integrated in us will start to come up, and some people become more distracted by this or that or whatever it is that is not integrated. So yes, we are looking like on a more global level, how do I integrate the challenge so that I mature and I become the new world that we are looking for? Like if every one of us becomes the new world through a crisis or through a disturbing time, we use that information to grow. So we develop a new world that is much bigger than the world that we are in now. And I think we need to use volatility as a driver for development. Yes, and that's what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that struck me about the way you conceptualized trauma at the beginning of this conversation was I think you referred to trauma in some way being correlated with the discombobulation of the personal narrative, where all these different parts of ourselves are in different places. And it brings me to an important question that I've been delving into recently, based on some of the work of Lacan, the psychoanalyst, who is suspicious that trauma trauma talk is really more about a premature understanding of the cause of disturbance rather than understanding that there is a hole in our meaning that has been created by whatever the disturbance is. And so people will often say, this traumatic event caused something, but there isn't much of a resolution in identifying what that cause is. I'd be interested to know, firstly, uh, I mean, in part because I am skeptical of using a cause approached a cause approach to understanding how to relieve suffering, even though I'm a doctor, where we're trained to identify the cause in order to treat the cause. I think, firstly, things are so multifactorial that to identify one cause is so difficult.
Mhm.
But also, cause implies that time is the reality. Something preceded something. And I'm also a little suspicious of that because I feel like time is relative and it's not an absolute. So I wonder, from your perspective, do you believe in the idea of a cause, or do you believe in the idea of somehow developing a relationship with that whole or disturbance in the narrative so that you can achieve some kind of peace?
I believe in all of what you just said, in just in different forms. I do think that there is a river of time, but the river of time is not absolute, but it's also not real. I think in our development, we are developing a sense of time because every one of us is movement. And the trauma is like always like a tension between a reduction of movement and the moving of the core of a being, a human being or any being. And so when there is a tension, we call it suffering. And the part that is frozen in time, that is stuck at a certain level where it got hurt, creates a tension. And so I do believe that there is this kind of disturbance around time that we feel when we feel more regressive and we don't know how to handle stuff and we say, should I do this or should I do that, or I'm scared. And actually I'm constantly scared without a significant reason, but I feel that. So there are disturbances, and but I also agree with the complexity that seeing trauma as an individual experience only and not as a much wider system that is, that we were born into. And it's not so easy to say, oh, this is just the one thing that happened here and that causes all of this. I also completely agree to this. And I agree to, when we talk, most people that say my trauma actually are saying my trauma symptoms, because the trauma is actually somewhere buried in that black hole that you were talking about, and we have no access to that. So I think that that's also true. So I think all of the things that you said are true somehow, but in different forms.
So when you are guiding people to a relief from this overwhelm and from whatever is associated with this trauma or this black hole, do you feel, in your experience, do you see people essentially naming the trauma and then getting relief from what the trauma is? Or do you think that they have an embodied experience of where this is, so they're able to somehow become unstuck or release that part of themselves into the current narrative of their lives?
Yeah, I like in a nutshell, I think trauma healing is that from the narrative that we hold, which describes partly the truth and is often also partly the defense mechanism that prevents getting to the trauma. So I don't believe at all in just narrating about the trauma. This I don't think is healing us. But when somebody speaks about the trauma, you can locate the trauma in the body. And so we dive, and then we stop the narration and we go deeper into the body. And I think in a relational setting, our conversation now is the present moment. But if for you or for me, trauma comes up and we are able to include it in now, so the past, which is the frozen time, and this present moment get synchronized. So through our bodies, we can literally bring the past back into the present moment. And I think that's where it can be dissolved, but not just by talking about it. The trauma sits much deeper in the body and in the emotions and in maybe now even in our ancestry, and it needs to be resolved there, not through, because the mind is often already disconnected from the body when it's about trauma, so it's not the tool to heal it.
Well, I have a sort of, I feel like with most of my opinions, they're just fundamentally paradoxical or hypocritical, or to some
Right.
extent, I feel like I live in a state of constant contradiction, which is the path toward something that I'm trying to understand. And, and on the one hand, there's nothing that you said that I disagree with, but I have an also opposing view that I also agree with, and I'd be interested to know what you think about that, which is that one of the Hindu perspectives that I find engaging is the notion of Satchit Ananda, which is that my fundamental nature is bliss. That when I'm connected to the trauma, I'm connected to the illusion of what I truly am. But that the nature of being and of consciousness is blissful. And so, in a superficial way, sometimes if I'm having a tough day or I'm annoyed by something, I'll say to myself, "That's not you. That's you. What do you believe you are bliss?" And I will say, "Yeah, I do believe I am bliss." But it's not always possible to believe that. So I'm curious to know about your own belief system. Do you think that we, being part of some kind of blissful, you know, predecessor or cause, are fundamentally bliss? And do you think when we disconnect from that bliss, partly because we're distracted by what the world's circumstances, we enter into an illusion of who we are? And in that sense, I sometimes wonder whether all of psychological narrative is an illusion, because really what we ought to do is, through that silence, reside in and express from that place of bliss.
Yeah, that's interesting. So fundamentally, I agree with this. On a fundamental level, I think all of this is very, very true. At the same time, if the separate self tells to the separate self, actually, I'm bliss, I don't agree with this anymore, because then the same part that is identified with the separation tells the part that is identified with the separation to calm down and feel blissful. And I think that's a bypass. So that's why, and this I very much agree with, the psychological dimension only, I don't think can create the liberation that many people are looking for. We need something bigger, a divine reality, Satchitananda, Brahman, like whatever, however we call that divine dimension is needed, because that's the deeper source that gives us a direction that doesn't come just from the separate sense of self. So that's very true. I need an anchor in something bigger than my own opinions and my own thoughts and my own understanding, because that's always already limited. And but I also feel that some people try to convince themselves of a spiritual dimension that they don't feel and feel separate from, and by that they are avoiding the pain in the body, and that recreates it all the time, and that creates a stagnation. It's like kind of both again.
Yeah, that
Maybe we
again
are
relates.
sharing the same the same contradictive confusion.
Well, it resonates with me because I often tell people, if you want to love yourself, the worst thing you can do is love yourself, because you are forever split into a subject and an object. Something is loving something, or something is saying you are bliss. Whereas if you are just existing in that state, then you don't have the self love or I am blissful. You are simply who you are. And I think, to your point about believing in something greater, I think science is really pointing out, for example, the advantages of awe. That awe is the healing modality. When you watch a beautiful sunrise or beautiful sunset, you feel united with something much larger, and the ego becomes smaller because you feel like you are part of whatever that greatness is. You once said to me, because I asked you about the awe that is sometimes induced by psychedelics, and certainly a lot of people have said they have amazing experiences of awe when they're on psychedelics. But and because of how you are, I know that you are open to all human experience and understanding all human experience. But you said something that I'd love for you to expound on. You said, well, it's not about objecting or not objecting. I just think that those mechanisms of reaching consciousness are stealing from consciousness. And it really alerted me to the importance of agency in transcendence. That when we can engage with agency in our own evolution, then that is a very different experience than induction by awe, or induction by drugs, or induction by martinis, which I love. So, but when I have a martini, I'm not thinking to myself, I'm going to have an experience of transcendence. I think it's a recreational activity, which may reveal some activity about how the brain is. So, in short, could you say something more about um, induced experiences of feeling connected to the whole versus one where you know this through your own agency?
Right. So that's beautiful. First of all, when you speak about agency, yes, it feels really good. And the second thing is, like, I think for many people, like psychedelic openings are a gateway to see something bigger or deeper. So and I think it's true. Many people experience this as an opening into another reality. And it has a reason why that reality is closed without it. That's also true. And in the West, we created like a consumerism attitude that if I can buy it and have it faster, it's better. And I would say no, because you're trying to bypass, capitalism gives you a chance to bypass, in a way, yourself and try, okay, I can be better, like a superhuman, by putting all kinds of stuff into my body. And I would say no. And when people start to own, they say, wow, this is my knowledge. No, you had that when you had an expanded state, but when you are back to your normal energy, you don't have it. It has a reason. So
Yeah.
let's be humble. I think humility is very important, awe and humility, because yes, I can see something bigger. If that becomes that fuel for my spiritual evolution and agency to engage more in a practice, that one day I'll be that state and it will be my natural state. To be in what I have seen before in the opening will be my state. If it's the state, then it feels like, oh, I resolved the karmic blockages in my system, and naturally my energy is like that. That's amazing. So if it becomes the fuel, it's good. If I need to do it again and again and again, then I think something's not working with the practice. And then I would say, let's look at the spiritual practice and let's look at the consumerism attitude and not the devotion, the humility. The West is not as good with humility as maybe other cultures, so that we bow down. We lost bowing, I think. And that's a very, very important aspect to receive a blessing.
Absolutely. I mean, that very much resonates with me. The idea of being engaged in the bow, because I think we like to think we can do it all on our own, right? At some level, we're like, I can use mindfulness and I can make myself go somewhere. But if you are separating yourself from the world, you're really denying yourself of the gift of your connection. I, I'm curious to know how you. Well, firstly, whenever you use your hands or move your hands, it's not just like ordinary nonverbal communication. I don't know what is going on, but I feel like a dog running around barking. I'm excited because I can feel something, smell something, know something. Do you feel an energy in your own hands when you are using them as you're
Yeah,
speaking?
yeah, I feel that the movement of my hands is also a movement of the energy. Like the whatever runs through my body in that moment is expressed through my whole body and not just through what I say. So yes, I think it is definitely also in the entire nervous system becomes a transmitter, or kind of, yeah, somehow like that, I guess, is the best explanation.
Well, one of the things that people sometimes are both encouraged by and frustrated by is that if you have a spiritual practice and if you can feel aligned, rather than the world throwing things at you, you experience the joy of your own ability as a
Mhm.
creator. Right? You can then create a life, and that life is created as you speak. A little bit like
Mhm.
Lady Gaga's song "Abracadabra." So
Right.
there's a magic that happens at the moment of articulation.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what do you say to people who say, this all sounds great, but I'm just way too overwhelmed by everything that's going on. Too much randomness, too much chaos, too many wars. It's like humanity has lost its collective mind, and I am dragged along with it. What would be the top three things you would say to people to start to get back on track
Mm.
as part of this fundamental creation?
Mm. Yeah, first I would honor their experience, that I understand that it's overwhelming. So first understand the state we are in and don't pathologize it, but say, okay, this I feel really overwhelmed. Because in the moment I own my overwhelm, I'm not anymore just the subject of my overwhelm. So but I'm owning the overwhelm, so the consciousness becomes bigger than the state. That's very important. So number one is own it. Number two is, what do you need as a next step? You need a community, you need somebody to talk to, you need a professional, you need some practice. So how can you practice to regulate your nervous system so that you see, wow, there is agency in it, and I can do something. Even if at the beginning it looks like small steps, it actually liberates part of my awareness, that I see, wow, I have even more agency than that. So where is your agency and how can you activate it? And the third thing, I really think what you said before is super important. We need community. We are not designed to do it alone. It's not a marathon run. It's something, we are not alone. That's the fundamental notion of trauma says I'm alone, and reaching out to other people was my original trauma. That's why I will learn everything through self-help books. Versus we are designed to reach out, and the vulnerability that happens when we reach out is actually the place where the divine takes place. Jesus already said that. And so it's like reaching out opens our heart to for something new to happen and the collective intelligence to take place. So I think looking for a community that can help us to build more resilience is also very, very important.
Well, I think it's backed up by science that one of the top most determinants of healthy longevity is social connection.
Mhm.
And so people think of social connection as a soft variable, but actually there's a reduction in immunity, there's an improvement in inflammation. Once you let go of the tight boundary that perhaps your trauma has taught you to separate yourself from the world, once you let go of what that boundary is, you begin to heal
Mhm.
at a physiologic level. And I think the more we understand this, the more intriguing it is. For example, in transcendental meditation, long-term meditators in a preliminary study were shown to be able to downregulate all 49 genes associated with inflammation. And they
Wow.
upregulated all of the genes associated with immunity and oxygen carrying capacity, at least most of the latter two. So the fact that you can feel less fatigued, more immune, and
Mhm.
then also if you have less inflammation through an exercise in transcendence really explains that there is a value to our bodies to be connected to something that is way beyond what we think of as the self.
I think
When
that's very true. And actually, we ran an epigenetic study of one of our 2-year training programs. And one of the side outcomes that we didn't even look for was that we saw that epigenetic aging in our group was reduced, like in 2 years was 1 year, and in the control group in 2 years was 3 years. So there is a reduction of the aging process that is quote unquote normal, that speaks along your lines. Yes.
do you believe that what do you think happens when we die?
that's a that's a question that I cannot answer in 30 seconds, first of all. So take two. Um, it depends. It depends on the state of consciousness. What we are identified with dies. So, and so it means that when consciousness stays identified with certain aspects of who we are, when we die, that enters a cycle of reincarnation, which means the identification will continue being identified in life and find itself another experience. But what is awake cannot die. So, what's truly awake stays awake because it's bigger than the cycle of living and dying, and it's bigger than the time that we discussed before. So, it witnesses that time, so that doesn't die. That's why a lot of spiritual traditions say, can you practice your awakening during this lifetime, because that releases the identification, and everything that's truly transcended is transcended. So that stays awake because it is awake. So always was. And that's why I would say in meditation, many people say, I'm meditating, I'm meditating. And I would say, yeah, meditation is coming into your life. At the beginning, it
Right.
looks like you're doing it, but eventually you'll find out that, meditation is meditating always already. Yeah.
Well, but this leads to another question that I had, which is it's more a reflection that I've noticed that most of the most important things that have happened for me or for any clients I've worked with have there might be a rational strategy or there might be a spiritual practice, but it's almost never a direct correlate of they do A and then B happens and then C happens. It just happens somehow. So something outside of the realm of logic is a form of intelligence that manifests itself. Now, in the brain, there is a default mode network that can perform this kind of complexity rearrangement, and suddenly you have these outcomes. We live in a world that's obsessed with logic. Like, do A, then B will happen. Do C, then D will happen. What do you tell people? I talk about the default mode network and then strategically unfocusing. Um, but I, like you, I think I have a certain kind of surrender to processes outside of logic that I'm both intrigued with and in love with.
Mhm.
And I think, like you were saying, when things come into you, it is an amazing experience to receive that gift, especially if you can bow, metaphorically speaking, when this gift comes to you. What do you think creates the conditions for things to happen that are outside of logic?
Yeah, first of all, I love what you just said. It's beautiful, and I think it's so important that in our Western conditioned world, yes, we to create structure, we need to plan and we need to build a house and it needs to be stable or do a surgery and we need to know what to do. I think all of these things are right. And there is another part of reality that doesn't work that way, and that I think is very, very important too, that we are open to something that's not linear, that is non-linear, and what we can do is humility again. It's like if I honor that there is something bigger, however I call it, that I am part of, that I am in, that we are in that reality, then the larger aspect, when I bow down to it, can bless me all the time. So when I open myself to insights or knowing or visions or whatever that I cannot produce myself, then I'm truly open to the future. And I believe the future is not a later point in time. The future is the influx of higher consciousness into in the present moment. And it's emerging. That's why great leadership, really great leadership, that is not that I know where we are going. I'm very comfortable in the path being created. That's a very different way. But for many people, that brings up so much fear, like because we carry a lot of fear, that when we integrate that fear, we feel more and more comfortable to not know. And that's why I think also great healers, we have a lot of, like, we know our art, but we also know that we don't know. And that allows us to go pathways that are not predictable, but they are emerging in the relationship with the client. And like that, it evolves into something that we both didn't know, but this is not unskillful. This is above skillful. You know?
Well, it's
Yeah.
exactly what you see in jazz. It's exactly what you see in improvisational dance, where you
Yes.
don't know what you're going to do, and all of a sudden this intelligence makes itself known. And in the brain, it actually makes sense because the part of the brain that codes for the future also codes for the narrative self.
Yes.
And so in the default mode network, the past, the present, and the future are all coded for in different ways by the same region. So it would make sense to me that the future is not necessarily somewhere else. That if you think of the block theory of time, the, it's just our brain's way of trying to make sense of time, but that the past, present, and future all exist in the here and now.
Right.
I would love to.
Just even one thing about this, because you could say, like the present moment when trauma happens, the intelligence of trauma says, here and now is not good for me. So, not here, not now is better. To shut down a part of my body, to shut down the overwhelm and the pain, and to go out of that region in myself and leave it. So when we say we are not present, yeah, but there is an intelligence to that that we often don't understand, and then it feels like a fight to be present, feels like an effort because we are working against that energy. But we could say trauma creates the past, and that past needs a future to resolve itself. So we are living in this tension, but that's a false understanding of the future because both of them are the past. The real future is exactly what you said now, that there is the download, and this region in the brain that receives the future is receiving higher consciousness, and that looks like a startup idea, it looks like a social movement idea, or like an insight that I have when I'm walking in the forest. But that is like, oh wow, yes, that's the future, not the struggle how to integrate the past, because that keeps me locked, and many thoughts are circling around that past, that unprocessed past, when it's individual, ancestral, and collective. So it's a huge amount of past that we didn't integrate as a humanity. So it keeps us all the time busy.
And this, I can tell you that whenever I'm around you, what I love about listening to you is not just that you make so much sense, but also that I feel like my learning comes through feeling and experiencing your own embodiment. And so I would love for people to experience more of who you are and know what it is you have to teach. Could you tell us a little bit more about the upcoming course that you have, what it is about, how it is structured? I think you'll be having some other experts also joining you, thinking about about well-being. But yeah, if you could tell us a little bit more, I would be so enthusiastic for people to have even a glimpse of an experience that I've had with you, because every time I spend time with you, it's an amazing gift.
Yeah, like first of all, likewise, Srini, I enjoy our conversations. I think we need more of this to
Yeah.
to continue this conversation. And yeah, the upcoming course is a shorter course to give an introduction or a taste of like some deep aspects, like what does trauma mean in our life? What does well-being, holistic well-being mean? How can I navigate through this time that is maybe challenging or stressful for me? There are many stressors in our time, from data speed to economy to ecology to our personal family relationships. And so we are looking through like different modules, what's nutrition, physical nutrition, and what's also other nutrition, other information we take in. How do we digest it? That's one. Then intimate relationships, and what's our purpose? How can we connect to the agency that you were talking about? And how is all of this part of a larger spiritual dimension also? So from trauma till the spiritual dimension, and what we can do on every step with meditations, practices, guest teachers, and also like a community, because I deeply believe as we are looking for communities and resilient fields, we can create something much stronger together. And even if we don't see each other, because these people live all around the world, many people over the years in our courses said, wow, I'm in a community and it amplifies my learning. And I'm sure you studying the human brain for such a long time, when there are for sure many aspects in your work that speak to the interconnectedness of our brains and our nervous systems when we when we join a mutual intention. And I have experienced this so often from the experiential side, like as facilitator of a group. So yeah, so that's basically in a nutshell what we do.
Well, I think it does you a disservice to ask you to summarize anything, because it's such a powerful, uh, message that you bring to the world. And I think I'd also want to say that I have a lot of friends and a lot of friends whose courses I would love to promote and encourage people to attend. I think in your case, I feel like I'm promoting the work of God, and so the fact that it can come through you is something that I know my community would really value, and so I hope that people will take advantage of this.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for just having this conversation, and I'd love to have another format of conversation where we can do some deep dives into some of the things we just touched on today.
Yes, I would love that too. I would love that too. And thank you. It's always lovely to be in your
Yeah.
presence. So thank you.
And you, Thomas. Thank you.